Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. But this is unlike any other Daily News Simplified because today we have got the results of Civil Services Examination 2023. And congratulations to all our students on your outstanding achievement in being selected for the UPSC Civil Service Examination 2023. Rao's Eyes Study Circle, as your dedicated coaching institute, couldn't be prouder of your remarkable success. Your relentless dedication, hard work, and unwavering commitment have finally paid off. This prestigious accomplishment is a testament to your perseverance, intellectual prowess, and exceptional abilities. You have proven yourself to be among the best of the best, and we are honored to have played a part in your journey. Throughout the rigorous preparation process, you have exhibited remarkable discipline, resilience, and a thirst for knowledge. You have embraced challenges, overcome obstacles, and consistently pushed yourself beyond your limits. Your exceptional performance in the examination is a true reflection of your determination and passion. We are immensely proud to have been a part of your success story. Our coaching institute has always believed in nurturing and guiding talented individuals like you, and your achievement validates our efforts. It is a moment of great joy and satisfaction for all the mentors, faculty, and staff who have worked tirelessly to support you throughout your preparation. Now, as you embark on this new chapter of your life as a civil servant, we have no doubt that you will make a significant and positive impact on society. Your knowledge, skills, and values will contribute to shaping a better future for our nation. We have full faith in your abilities to excel in your chosen fields and serve the country with integrity, compassion, and dedication. Once again, congratulations on your well-deserved success. Your achievement inspires and motivates us all. We wish you a bright and fulfilling future as you embark on this remarkable journey of serving the nation. May you continue to shine and make us proud. Apart from this, every year there are students who benefit from Daily News Simplified and Daily Prelims Practice videos. If there is a person who has selected and has benefited from Daily News Simplified videos, do let us know, because that is what drives our passion to continue with this free initiative. Let us now begin the discussion. Aim to lift AFSPA from Assam by 2023 end, says Chief Minister Himant Biswa Sharma. Now, when we talk about AFSPA, it's a very serious matter, not only for the country but also from the perspective of civil services examination. AFSPA, which confers special powers upon the Indian Army in disturbed areas and legitimizes basically any actions they might take in disturbed areas. The law, however, has been misinterpreted by many, and there are calls for revocation of the AFSPA, whether it is warranted, misplaced, or whether it is totally unnecessary. There is hardly any law in the Indian statutory provisions. There is hardly any other law in India's history which has been as debated as AFSPA. Not just that, from the perspective of mains examination, this is very important topic. Because first and foremost, AFSPA is deployed in areas where there is an issue with the public order, where there is already high level of extremism or insurgency. And so if you look at the GS paper 3 syllabus, it gets fit into all the lines of the syllabus. We talk about challenges to internal security, when we talk about security challenges and their management in border areas, when we talk about linkages between development and spread of extremism, it is applicable everywhere. And from the perspective of civil services examination, first we have to understand the provisions of AFSPA. Why is it needed? Why are there so many protests against AFSPA, for the revocation of AFSPA? And finally, is there something we can do about and maintain a right balance so that AFSPA is used in the way it was first envisaged to be? So whenever you have a recollection of AFSPA over the years, you recall several voices of protest. There was this 11-year-long fast by Ram Sharmila, the Manipur activist, demanding a repeal of the law. Even before that, in 2004, various civil society groups in Manipur launched an intense agitation after the death of Manorma Devi, a civilian who died in the custody of Assam Rifles. In 2005, following her death, the Union Home Minister visited Manipur and instituted a commission under Justice Jeevan Reddy, which also asked for the modification or repeal of AFSPA. And so similarly, there have been a lot of committees and the recommendations, and various state governments from time to time have demanded the repeal of AFSPA, or at least modification in the way it functions. And even before we delve into the provisions, it is necessary to examine the context in which AFSPA is used. During exceptional situations of internal disturbance in India, the Indian Army is called in to quell the potential and actual violence. Now, in such a context, the Army is given extraordinary powers under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Now, the armed forces generally cannot be deployed against Indian citizens unless a local government or central government asks the army to intervene in a situation that the government is unable to handle. In short, the army is called in only after the local police action has failed and insurgents have gained an upper hand. The danger in such a situation is that it is possible for insurgents to take over and make a state secede from the union. This obviously is unacceptable, and so in such situations a need was felt to create an act which would have certain different powers as envisaged in various criminal procedure codes and in the Constitution of India. And that is how AFSPA, or Armed Forces Special Powers Act, came into existence. So it was enacted in 1958. That was the first time it was enacted, which grants, as we have discussed, extraordinary powers and immunity to armed forces to bring back order in disturbed areas. We will understand what this means. So moving on to the provisions. As we have seen, it provides special powers to Indian armed forces, and it empowers the governor of the state or the central government to declare any part of the state as disturbed areas, if in its opinion there exists a dangerous situation in the said area which makes it necessary to deploy armed forces in that particular region and to restore public order. Now, when state governor calls for army intervention, that seems okay, but how can central government instruct army to be deployed in a particular state? And that power comes from Article 355. So if you read Article 355, it says that the duty of the Union to protect states against external aggression and internal disturbance. It shall be the duty of Union to protect every state against external aggression and internal disturbance, and to ensure that the government of every state is carried on in accordance with the provision of the Constitution. So even if the state government is not in agreement for the deployment of armed forces, central government can basically shove an army in a particular area if the government feels that that particular area is disturbed. Now, what if a particular area is declared as disturbed area and army is deployed? What are the powers which are then given to armed forces, which have been very contentious since then? So AFSPA allows the authorized officers to open fire at any individual even if it results in the death of the individual. The armed forces get power to arrest anyone, search any property or any person, and seize, which may be necessary to restore the order in a disturbed area without the warrant. And the most problematic part of whole AFSPA is legal immunity to army. Armed forces personnel have complete legal immunity or indemnity for their actions as far as those actions were committed in disturbed areas. So you can understand that not only that AFSPA provides very wide and blanket powers to armed forces, and that is the reason that it has always been hated by the people on which it has been levied. But according to the government of India, extraordinary situations demand extraordinary measures, and that is how AFSPA is justified. Of course, the application of AFSPA has led to restoring of order in various areas. It allows for effective functioning. It is essential for armed forces to function effectively in insurgency and militancy affected areas. But the laws which exist normally in a particular area in normal situations might hinder in the way they function against terrorist organizations, against insurgents. And to empower armed forces to make them feel confident, it is important to enshrine them with such powers. At the end of the day, we have to ensure security of nation, and hence provisions of this act have played a crucial role in maintaining law and order in disturbed areas, thus protecting sovereignty and security of the nation. And then finally, we need to protect the members of armed forces. It is crucial to empower members of armed forces who constantly face threat to their lives at the hands of insurgents and militants. Its withdrawal would result in poor morale. Apart from that, you have to remember one thing, that extraordinary powers are also necessary as the armed forces face asymmetric warfare involving raids, ambushes, mines and explosive devices, even sabotage. And so it is important to empower them with such powers. But that absolutely does not mean that AFSPA has not been misused. In fact, there have been documented abuse of power. It has been alleged that immunity granted by the Act has led the armed forces to misuse the powers and commit offenses like enforced disappearances, fake encounters, and sexual assault. For example, Justice Verma Committee on Offences Against Women in Conflict Areas said AFSPA legitimizes impunity for sexual violence. Justice Santosh Hegde Committee to investigate fake encounters in Manipur described it as a symbol of oppression, and Justice Jeevan Reddy Committee recommended removal of absolute immunity under AFSPA. Then, of course, it is a threat to fundamental rights, especially when it perpetuates in a particular area for 50 years. It leads to suspension of fundamental rights and liberties guaranteed to the citizens by the Constitution and hence weakens democracy. Human rights violations in AFSPA areas are not inquired into and followed by adequate action. Thus, it is against the principle of natural justice, because of which the credibility of Indian democracy is diminished. There are certain areas where insurgency and terrorism got bolstered as a result of AFSPA, because people's disillusionment with the democratic setup is exploited by secessionists and terror sympathizers, which leads to more violence and more counter-violence, creating a vicious cycle. Then, according to some of the people, it has proven to be ineffective. Critics argue that this act has failed in its objective of restoring normalcy in disturbed areas, although being in existence for about 50 years. And then finally, the areas which might be declared by the government as disturbed areas is beyond the judicial review, which in essence violates the basic structure to the Constitution of India. So what exactly can we do going forward? And there are 4 sets of measures which can be taken. Adherence to human rights. It needs to be emphasized that human rights compliance and operational effectiveness are not constraining requirements. In fact, adherence to human rights norms and principles strengthens the counter-insurgency capability of force. At the same time, we need robust safeguards. For example, every death caused by armed forces in a disturbed area, be it of a common person or a criminal, should be thoroughly inquired into. Then we need to remove ambiguity in the law. The terms like disturbed, dangerous, and land forces need to be clearly defined to ensure greater clarity. And finally, we need to ensure transparency. Greater transparency in communicating the status of existing cases to include its display on the Army and government's website. Proactive feedback to petitioners on actions taken by government in past human rights cases are some of the reforms which we can bring about to break this vicious cycle of counter-terrorist activity, fueling insurgency, and then again emboldening the state's response. So this topic is fairly important from the perspective of prelims examination, but there the focus would be limited only on provisions, while from the perspective of mains examination the focus would be on merits and demerits and way forward for AFSPA. Let's now move on to the next article. Solidarity for Peace has appeared as a column on page number 6. This article talks about G7 and how it must build a global consensus on the world's challenges. G7, a group of 7 countries, is a multilateral group. And this article has brought the importance of multilateralism, a process of organizing relations where a group of 3 or more countries interact with each other. If you compare it with unilateralism, where a country acts unilaterally, or bilateralism, where 2 countries interact with each other for mutual benefit, multilateralism stands out. When you read the global affairs, what you read about is United Nations, World Trade Organizations, IMF, World Bank. All of these are multilateral institutions. And most of them were created in the aftermath of World War II, and they were propounded and facilitated by the West and especially United States of America. They have of course done a lot of things for the global community, but in recent times they have been called into question. They are facing significant challenges because of their ineffectivity. And so it is important for us to take up these arguments. If you look at the GS paper 2 syllabus, it says bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interests. Then international institutions also is a part of your syllabus. So We are going to first understand what multilateralism is and how is it distinguished from other such bodies, especially minilateral bodies or bilateral relations. What are the advantages that it has to offer, and then finally, what are the challenges that it is posing. Also, if you have understood this topic well, you can solve this practice question, which is multilateralism is coming under threat mainly due to the actions of the developed countries. Do you agree? So what is multilateralism? At the very basic, it's the process of organizing relations between groups of 3 or more states or countries. So whenever two countries, for example, A and B interact with each other, that is called bilateralism. When a single country acts alone, that is called unilateralism. But when a group of 3 or more countries develop a process to organize their relationships, that is called multilateralism. So what could be some of the examples of global multilateralism? The best example, of course, is United Nations. Then you have World Trade Organization. Then, of course, you have IMF, which was recently taken up in the DNS. Then, of course, you have World Bank. So these are global multilateral institutions where more than 170 countries have come together, which satisfies the definition of 3 or more, and have developed a process to organize their relationships. United Nations has much wider connotation, whereas World Trade Organization is more about trade. IMF is more about fiscal policies and financial matters. World Bank is more about development related aid and policies. So although multilateralism has a long history, but it is primarily associated with the era after the World War II. And you can clearly see that all these global multilateral institutions were created post World War II, during which there was a large number of or emergence of large number of multilateral agreements, which were primarily led by United States in particular and West in general. And of course, you will see that later on this will emerge as one of the basic criticisms of these multilateral institutions. And still, the way these organizations are set up, the way they function, the way they governed, it's basically marked by the hegemony or the dominance of West in general and USA in particular. So what is it that separates multilateralism from other regional organizations? And these are 3 very important principles: the principle of indivisibility, the principle of reciprocity, and the principle of dispute settlement. So when we talk about these groups, which should have 3 or more members, we are often confused with respect to the groups like World Trade Organization, IMF, and groups like RCEP or ASEAN, because after all these groups have 3 or more members. So will they be called multilateral institutions or multilateral group? And so the answer is no, because a multilateral group or organization should have 3 very distinct principles, or should be based upon these 3 principles: the principle of indivisibility, reciprocity, and dispute settlement. Starting with indivisibility. Indivisibility basically means that there should not be any kind of distinction of interests. For example, NATO or North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which has been in news a lot. NATO is a very clear-cut example to show the principle of indivisibility. All of us know its principle of collective security, in which a war against one state is considered to be a war against all the states, ensuring that any act of aggression against a member is met with a response from all the members. And this was the basic reason why Russia chose to attack Ukraine, because Ukraine was about to enter into NATO, which would have enabled Ukraine to secure collective security. And so you can clearly see that security of a particular country, of a group or a collective, is treated as a security of everyone. So it is believed in multilateralism that if the interest of one of the nation is threatened, so is the interest of all of them, and then it is treated alike. Another example of this would be the most favored nation status given under WTO. As soon as a country becomes a member of World Trade Organization, it has to enable certain level of preferential treatment to all other members of WTO. And here, the interest is the trade liberalization or easing of the trade of goods and services. But this is very different from what you have in a bilateral relation. Bilateralism, by contrast, fragments relation between the states. If India is going to enter into comprehensive economic partnership with, let's say, UAE, then the terms of trade available to UAE would be very different to those available to other countries. Then after indivisibility, another very important principle is the principle of or diffuse reciprocity. Now, what does this term means? Now, in multilateralism, for example, let's take again the situation of collective security of NATO. And let's say tomorrow Russia decides to attack Germany or any other country which is a part of NATO and hence has the right for collective security, and all other countries enter into collaboration to defend Germany and in retaliation attack Russia. There will be a lot of war budget which will be expended by these countries. So, will these countries be eligible for reimbursement of the war efforts? No. There is an expectation that there will not be an equivalence of obligations, because their compensation or recompensation lies in the knowledge that should they be attacked, they too will benefit from collective response in the aftermath of any particular attack. And also, the world is now knowing that all the countries can come together and defend Germany, and they should never touch any of the members of NATO, because US along with France might also detonate nuclear weapon to defend the NATO countries, and that is the advantage and not the recompensation of the war efforts. And if you look at it, the indivisibility, that no distinction of interest, is the parent principle through which the principle of diffuse reciprocity is being derived. Because if the countries see each other's interests as their own, they are never going to demand for equivalence of obligation. They will consider it as their own defense. And finally comes the dispute settlement. For the states to feel assured of the returns of treating their interest as indivisible, multilateral arrangements tend to incorporate some mechanism for ensuring that countries act in accordance with the expected norms. And these countries evolve various kinds of mechanisms, for example, compliance, peer review, which may suit more informal arrangements, or the creation of more formalized body in case of WTO's dispute settlement mechanism to enable the dispute settlement. And now you can see how important dispute settlement is. Just because dispute settlement is not functioning well in past 3 years in case of WTO, people have started raising question on the relevance and future importance of WTO. So now the obvious question is, what do countries gain by entering into multilateralism, and what are the challenges which multilateralism is facing as of now, because of which the author had to say that this might be an era where India should be focusing more on bilateral relations. And so there are 4 distinct reasons because of which the countries chose to enter into large number of multilateral institutions, especially after World War II. And the first one is directly related to the Second World War, where the unilateral steps taken by Axis powers were in majority responsible for the outbreak of the Second World War. And so it was decided that it's time to discourage the unilateralism. Unilateralism is basically a doctrine or agenda that supports one-sided action. Such action may be in disregard to other parties as well. And more often than not, when countries choose to act unilaterally, they end up hurting the global or the regional cause. And so it has been found that multilateralism discourages unilateralism. And you can see that barring few exceptions of unilateral steps taken by United States of America, for example, their actions in Afghanistan and Iraq, their walking out of Paris climate deal, even before that Kyoto agreement, except barring those instances, not many countries have chose to act unilaterally in past 40 to 50 years. And so you can say that this has been one of the biggest advantage of multilateralism. But it's just not about discouragement to unilateralism. Multilateralism gives voice to small powers or middle powers like India, Brazil, Russia, or even smaller countries. Multilateralism might not give them influence directly if they choose to act independently, but when they enter into multilateral organizations and they form groups like G77, they at least get a voice at the global stage where these global powers are listening to them. So for a small power to influence a great power, this Lilliputian strategy of small countries banding together to collectively bind a larger one has proven to be quite effective. And this is one of the reasons which has compelled the developed countries to take actions on climate change, which is a global cause of concern. Similarly, multilateralism might allow one great power, US, to influence another great power, USSR earlier or Russia now. or USSR earlier and China now. Because you have to understand that for a great power to seek control through bilateral ties could be very costly. Because US is never going to directly fight Russia. It has never fought USSR directly. Because it may require bargaining, compromise with the other great power, or direct conflict. But through NATO, US can deter and has deterred Russia very effectively. And so this is one of the examples which shows you that even great power need coalition. And then finally, this is something which all of us can think of very easily, is that multilateralism can offer effective solutions to global challenges. For example, one of the most effective actions so far in the form of Montreal Protocol with respect to ozone depleting substances is a multilateral treaty. Then a similar action is needed on terrorism, and it is simply not possible to counter the menace of terrorism by bilateral or unilateral actions. You need the cooperation of each and every country, as well as their full commitment and faith towards that treaty to eliminate terrorism. So these are the 4 important advantages. But if everything is so rosy about multilateralism, why learned author has chose to write that this is the time for bilateral actions? And the simple reason is that multilateralism is facing a lot of challenges in the present context. And the first and foremost challenge to multilateralism is coming from its most significant propounder, which is the United States of America and its unilateral actions. Because in past 10 to 20 years, US has taken such unilateral actions and steps which have led other countries to question the very utility of multilateralism. Because currently a perception has been built up that United States is inclined more to act unilaterally rather than through multilateral institutions which were kind of forced upon US itself on the global community. Because if you look at the actions of US in terms of climate change, it never ratified Kyoto Protocol. It ratified, agreed to Paris, walked away, then walked in. It has never been a party to International Criminal Court. It chose to attack Iraq without any proof or evidence of weapons of mass destruction available there, or without the approval of United Nations or Security Council. Then it unilaterally walked away from JCPOA with respect to Iran nuclear deal. And these are just few instances to show you how USA itself is conducting unilateral actions in defiance of all the multilateral organizations. Apart from that, another important threat which is coming from, or in fact the most important threat which is coming to the multilateralism is from minilateralism. So just like multilateralism, minilateralism is also about countries coming together, but these are a different set of arrangements. These are quite flexible and have ad hoc frameworks whose membership varies based on situational interests, shared values, and relevant capabilities. And the best example of that would be regional blocs like ASEAN or RCEP, which is based on location. Then you might have G7 or G20 on the basis of a financial or economic framework. These are called minilateral institutions. These are minilateral rather than universal. These are voluntary rather than legally binding. These are disaggregated rather than comprehensive. And these are more often than not regional rather than global. And they do not follow top to bottom approach, but they follow bottom to top approach. Then the rise of China has played a very important role in posing a key challenges to these multilateral institutions. On one hand, China is challenging the hegemony of these already existing institutions, especially the financial ones, for example, World Bank and IMF, by creating challenging organizations like One Belt, One Road initiative. Also, the rise of Chinese hegemony within these organizations, because of its size of the economy, is now challenging their majority within these organizations, and now these developed countries are sort of losing the interest within these organizations or in these organizations. Because if these countries do not command power over these organizations, they are going to disband them. And finally, last but not the least, a major challenge to the multilateralism is coming from the threat that it has to offer to the national sovereignty. Because every time you become a part of a multilateral organization, you give up some of the powers. The state has to give up some of its power. For example, when you become a part of WTO, you give up the power to unilaterally change the subsidy regime. Or when you become part of IMF, and if you have to take a loan from IMF, you give up on your sovereignty over financial matters of the country. You have to follow what IMF has to say. This has led to a lot of group of nations to believe that either the way we are doing multilateralism has to change, or we will resort to the minilateralism, which offers much more flexibility. So from the perspective of international relation, this is a very, very important topic which highlights the declining role of multilateralism and rise of minilateralism. Let's now move on to the next article. BJP's Basan Gowda Patil takes oath in the name of Hindutva Gau Mata. So though a majority of newly elected Karnataka MLAs took oath in the name of God and the Constitution of India, a few of them took oath in the name of voters and local deities. And this article, if you focus, has brought into the importance of Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the Legislative Assemblies. Not just from the perspective of politics, but also from the perspective of UPSC examination, the topic of Speaker has been often asked. For example, in 2022, UPSC had asked, with reference to the Deputy Speaker of Lok Sabha, consider the following statements. Similarly, in 2018, the question was about Speaker. Both these questions highlight the importance of this very important constitutional post from the perspective of prelims examination. But do not forget the main syllabus where Parliament and state legislature forms the part of your syllabus. So we are going to go through and understand Speaker and Deputy Speaker of Lok Sabha, and keep in mind that whatever is applicable for presiding officer is applicable for the presiding officer at the state level, that is for the Legislative Assembly as well. So we are going to discuss the constitutional provisions with respect to their appointment, removal, sources of powers, their powers, and the protection which are available to them. So for conducting the proceeding of the House, each House, for example, in case of India, we have Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, has its very own set of presiding officers. While in case of Rajya Sabha, we have chairman and deputy chairman. On the other hand, in case of Lok Sabha, we have speaker and deputy speaker. At the same time, it is important for us to understand as to when these offices came into existence. Was it after the independence, or these offices have been continuing even prior to independence? Most of you might be knowing that these positions came into existence through the Government of India Act 1919. And for the first time, these offices were constituted in year 1921. And so in year 1921, Frederick White and Sachidanand Sinha were appointed as Speaker and Deputy Speaker respectively by the Governor General of India. And so here one important or key element which you cannot miss out is that they were appointed by the Governor General of India but not elected by the council. And so the obvious question is that who was the first Indian to be elected as the Speaker of the Council, and that was Vittal Bhai J. Patel in 1925. So these are very preliminary level facts which you should keep in mind. So let's now move on to the actual provisions related to Speaker and Deputy Speaker. So what you see on screen is the complete provisions related to Deputy Speaker and Speaker, while provisions related to Speaker have been written on the left hand side and provisions related to Deputy Speaker have been written on the right hand side. Let us now start the discussion by understanding the manner of election of both of them. So of course, all of us know that they are elected by the members of the Lok Sabha. And of course, as soon as either of the position of Deputy Speaker or Speaker falls vacant, a re-election has to be conducted. Now here is a key difference between Speaker and Deputy Speaker with respect to who is the one responsible for notifying the re-election. While in case of Speaker, the notification is issued by President, but on the other hand, in case of Deputy Speaker, it is notified by the Speaker himself or herself. Then of course after election, it's very obvious to talk about the removal procedure. And as you can see on both left and right side, whatever has been written is same. So the process of removal of both Speaker and Deputy Speaker are exactly the same, except for a very minute difference, which is Speaker resigns and gives or tenders his resignation to Deputy Speaker, whereas Deputy Speaker tenders his or her resignation to the Speaker. Apart from that, these two conditions, that if a person ceases to be a member of Lok Sabha, ceases to be Speaker or Deputy Speaker, or he or she is removed by a resolution of the House, that is when they stop being the Speaker or Deputy Speaker. Now it is important for us to understand that this removal through resolution of the House should be passed by majority of all the then members of the House. let us know in the comment box what does this term the then members of the house means, and majority of the then members, what does it denote? So this is absolutely common for speaker as well as deputy speaker. So the only difference for you to recall is that the speakers and deputy speaker resign by tendering their resignation to each other. So we are done with election and removal, but what about their powers? Now, since these posts are constitutional in nature, of course, they are going to derive their power majorly from the Constitution of India. However, Constitution of India is not the only source of power for these two bodies or chairs. Of course, you have rules of procedure and conduct of business rules of each house, and then you have a lot of parliamentary conventions, somewhat sort of a precedent, which have become the source of power for these two posts. So there are three sources of power for these two posts, which is of course common to both of them. Now, rules of procedure and conduct of business is a kind of rule book which has been designed by the Lok Sabha itself to guide the business and proceedings of the house. So they are written in nature. Whereas on the other hand, parliamentary conventions are a set of unspoken rules or precedents which are not written in nature. But this is what has been happening since the time of independence. So in future, if certain similar circumstances emerge, exactly that has to be followed by the speaker or the deputy speaker. But there is no legal force which exists to enforce the convention rules on speaker or deputy speaker. Now here it is important for you to understand that deputy speaker is going to perform his or her duties only when the speaker is absent from the house. Deputy speaker performs such actions of speaker when the post of speaker lies vacant. In either of the cases, when deputy speaker is performing the role of speaker, deputy speaker has all the powers which the speaker is entitled to. Not just that, if speaker is absent from the joint sitting of both the houses, then in that case also, speaker chairs the joint sitting of both the houses. That of course brings us to what are the detailed powers of this post. Since both speaker and deputy speaker are presiding officers of the house, their main task is maintenance of order and decorum on the floor of the house, so that the business of the house can be conducted in an orderly fashion. And this, you can say, is the primary responsibility of presiding officers. And they have final power, they have final judgment over these calls that they take. Then the next important task which speaker and deputy speaker presiding officers have is the interpretation. They are the final interpreters of not only the constitutional provisions but also rules of procedure and conduct of business and the parliamentary conventions. If you're reading the newspaper regularly, you must have seen the members of parliament fighting very often, entering into altercation with respect to their differing interpretations of either rules and procedure or parliamentary convention. Now, in all those cases, the speaker or deputy speaker, whoever may be the presiding officer at that point of time, becomes the final interpreter as to what is going to happen. Another very significant power of presiding officer is casting vote. Now, of course, all of us know that presiding officers do not and cannot vote in the first instance, but they can definitely exercise their casting vote in case of a tie. So if there is a resolution or a bill where both the sides have equal number of votes, then presiding officer can take or choose one of the sides, and that becomes the decider. Such a vote becomes a casting vote and it is exercised to remove a deadlock in the house. Then you must have seen a lot of meetings and proceedings of Lok Sabha being adjourned or suspended or kept in suspended animation. And the final authority to either adjourn or suspend is vested in the presiding officer of the house. So the suspension of the meeting or adjournment of the meeting can take place if there is no quorum in the house. So all of us know that quorum of the house is 1/10 of the total membership of the house. So if let's say the total membership of house is 545, which means that at least 55 members have to be present in order to conduct the proceedings of the house. And if this minimum number is not achieved in a particular meeting, then speaker will call off that particular meeting. Apart from that, if proceedings of a particular meeting are not being conducted in a peaceful manner, there is a lot of chaos on the floor of the house or altercation, then also the presiding officer can adjourn the meeting. Then of course all of us know, and we have seen in the recent DNS, how the presiding officer of a house is the final authority in case of anti-defection law and disqualifications under anti-defection law. So all the decisions under the provisions of the 10th schedule to the Constitution of India are taken by the presiding officer. Then another very important aspect is the categorization or labeling of a particular bill as the money bill. And Speaker of the Lok Sabha has the final authority to categorize a particular bill as a money bill. And his or her decision on this matter is absolutely final. And it is very important because once a bill is categorized as a money bill, the opinion of Rajya Sabha becomes irrelevant on that matter. And so this provision has been very often used by the government who does not have majority in Rajya Sabha to bypass the second house or the Council of States and directly send it to the president for his or her approval. And of course, the last one, we have seen that the presiding officer of Lok Sabha, either speaker or deputy speaker, they chair the joint sitting of both the houses. If speaker is not present, then deputy speaker will chair. But if deputy speaker is not present, let us know in the comment section who is the one who is going to preside the joint sitting of both the houses. Now, having looked at the powers of the position of presiding officer of Lok Sabha, you can understand that it is a very crucial to the successful functioning of Lok Sabha and hence in some ways the democracy of our country. And so of course, a lot of protections have also been provided to this post. And so, the salaries and allowances of presiding officers, speaker and deputy speaker are fixed by the parliament and not by the government. Apart from that, the expenditures incurred by the houses are the expenditures charged on the Consolidated Fund of India and hence not subject to the voting every year at the time of the annual budget. And so through this way, the Constitution has made sure that these houses as well as the position of speaker and deputy speaker continue to function in somewhat independent or autonomous manner. Then of course comes a very important aspect which is about the security of the tenure of these posts. Because the presiding officer, speaker or deputy speaker can be removed only by a resolution passed by the absolute majority of the house and not by the government. Apart from that, if he or she discontinues to be a member of the Lok Sabha, then of course they do not have the right to become the speaker or continue as a speaker or a deputy speaker. And because this removal is through absolute majority and not by the general majority of the then members present and voting, it is really difficult to remove them once they are elected. Of course, they can be removed if the ruling coalition has the sufficient amount of numbers, but otherwise they cannot be removed just by the whims of the government. Apart from that, the motion for the consideration of removal of the presiding officer can be considered only when it has the support of 50 members of the House, which of course is a very high cutoff for the preliminary stage of removal of the presiding officer. Now, apart from this, we know that there is an absolute immunity to the members of the House when they are speaking within the confines of the House. They can utilize this opportunity to even criticize and mount pressure on the presiding officers. And it's specifically because of that, their work and conduct cannot be discussed on the floor of the House, except when the resolution or motion of their removal is under discussion. Except that, barring that, their functioning, their work cannot be discussed or criticized on the floor of the House. Apart from that, a very high position has been allocated to the Speaker of the House in the order of the precedence. She is placed at 7th rank in the order of precedence list, along with the Chief Justice of India. So you can see that the constitutional position of the Speaker of Lok Sabha is same as that of Chief Justice of India. And so you can see that the place which has been accorded to the Lok Sabha is of course lower than the President, Vice President, Prime Minister and the governors, but it is higher than the cabinet ministers, chief ministers and other judges of the Supreme Court. And this could be one of the prelims question where the statement could be framed like Chief Justice of India and Speaker of Lok Sabha are accorded the same order of precedence. The next article for discussion has appeared on page number 6, the problem with our university vision. So the number of Indian institutes among the top 1000 globally has risen to 27 from 22 last year. And the Indian Institute of Science Bangalore has moved up 31 places to emerge as the highest ranked Indian institute in 2023 edition. Now in this particular article, the author talks about various issues with India's higher education system. Since he is a professor, he is observing India's higher education from close quarters, and so he just does not suggest us the challenges or the problems, but also gives us way forward. Now, if you're wondering as to how this topic is relevant from the perspective of mains examination, let's have a look at the syllabus of GS Paper 2. Governance, Constitution, Polity, Social Justice and IR. Issues relating to development and management of social sectors, health and education is a part of your syllabus. And in mains 2015, UPSC framed this question. The quality of higher education in India requires major improvements to make it internationally competitive. Do you think that the entry of foreign educational institutions would help improve the quality of higher education and technical education in the country? Discuss. And so from the perspective of mains examination, this is a very, very pertinent topic.